All right, I'll call the meeting to order.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Roll call.
President Jensen.
Here.
Trustee Alexander.
Here.
Trustee Holm.
Here.
Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Runici.
Here.
Trustee Smalley.
Here.
And Trustee Wisniewski. Thank you.
All right, we will start with citizen participation per Village Resolution 2017-01. Anyone wishing to address the village board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The village board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of the publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they are participating in a public hearing or if specifically allowed by a majority vote of the village board due to involvement in an agenda item. Mary, come on up.
Green is go. I just wanted to ask if there were any updates regarding the recreational path proposed from East Troy to McWanago. And I know you can't engage in any conversation according to village statute, blah, blah, blah. But this is something that the East Troy Area Community Foundation is very hopeful that we'll be able to participate, but I haven't gotten any other information or know of any other information. Do I contact Lynch? I can contact you. And I probably will have the president of the foundation in on this communication. His name is Mike Felsky, just so you know. Okay? That's it. I'm done.
Thank you, Mary. Gene?
Good evening, board members and citizens. I got just 4 things to talk about.
Just real quick, name, we know who you are, but for the
Okay.
record, name and address, please.
Oh, I meant to do that. Gene Rosmarineski, 2968 Main Street, East Troy. 4 things. First of all, I'm looking at approval of $85,000 to do pavement over at Mill Park. I go by, there's hardly anybody ever using that place. So then if you go pave that, then you're going to have maintenance on it later. I'm suggesting you not spend that $85,000 on that Mill Park. Instead, spend it at Mitchell Park. I see in the minutes for Mitchell Park, there's an article that says adding meshing fencing to enclose the top of spectator areas. And I kind of went and looked at meshing fencing, and it looked to me like it's stuff with a bunch of holes in it. It's not really sunshade. I would suggest making that a sunshade so people sitting in the bleachers don't get sunburnt. And the backstop. That backstop where the men play softball, the diamond that's facing this way and the food thing is over here. When you play left field out there, it's murder when the sun shines right in your eyes. And we got a big backstop there. We could put some sunshade up along the top of that so the sun doesn't go directly into the left fielder's eyes. Just go out there sometime and take a look. Or look at those left fielders missing balls because they can't see them. So I think we could use the money better over there. And let's see. Okay. And then I want to publicly thank Jason Smalley for answering a bunch of my questions today. He is your representative on the East Troy Area Emergency Services District. And I had some questions about some of the things I've been hearing, like the price of that fire truck that we're going to be getting, $1.5 million, and then about Spring Prairie dropping out, deciding they weren't going to do our service anymore. Well, I found out since they decided to do it. Good, because that might have cost us quite a bit of money. And he answered other questions, so thank you very much, Jason. And lastly, I want to thank Eileen for this excellent memorandum titled Shared Revenue Bill about Assembly Bill 245 that you had in the packet. It is really informative, and I said, no other municipality does this. Nobody else is going to give you this kind of information like you do. It is great. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for the compliments. Any other citizen participation? Going once, going twice. Okay, with that, we will close citizen participation, move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all of the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
All right, we have a motion in 2 seconds. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to miscellaneous business. Item 1, presentation by Deputy Chief DeMayo regarding police staffing.
Good evening. I'm going to start by apologizing. I do have a cough, so I might cough a little bit through this presentation. But all right. So as you guys remember, from January to March, I went to Northwestern's Command College. And through the 10 weeks, what kind of got the ball rolling with this project was the class. And my staff study consisted of increasing staffing within the Village of East Troy's Police Department. Those 3 months extended to 7 months. After I graduated, I thought to myself, well, what better year to come to the board and say, hey, this is what I found out during my research, and this is what I'd like to propose to you guys, since we are coming up on the 2024 budget in hopes to adding another body to our police department. So to begin, a little history within our police department. Our last officer, a full-time officer, was hired in 1994. The population at the time in the Village of East Troy was approximately 2,600. So I took this information. This was research I found. The village did a staff study in 2008, and this was the information I had gathered from their packet, that the village actual rate of growth over the last 10 years has exceeded previous projections by a substantial margin. For example, the village's 2000 comprehensive land use plan used Department of Administration's population projections to forecast growth out of 2020. At that time, the DOA's 2000 projected population of the year 2015 was 3,872. The current DOA estimates indicate that the village exceeded that projection in only 5 years. So the village is growing at a much faster rate than what they anticipated. So what I wanted to do, like I said, this has been a 7-month project. I have a lot of information that I'm trying to squeeze in 10 slides for you guys. What I thought was very important to start out with was comparables, looking at departments our size, our population, and go from there. So what I did was I looked at, these are the 2 that I chose. I looked at other municipalities, but to put into the slides today, I looked at the Village of Elm Grove. Their population is 6,500. They're 3.2 square miles, and they are landlocked, so they're not growing. And I looked at Village of Butler. Their population is 1,800. They're 0.9 square miles, and they're also landlocked. Both of those municipalities are located within Waukesha County. Now, if you're looking at our population, as of 1/1 of 23, our population was 5,000. That is also anticipated to increase. We do have the loft apartments that those are 3 80-unit apartments. So thinking there's 1 person to each unit there, that's 240 people. But I think there's units from 1 to 4. So I think we can, a reasonable person would articulate that there's probably going to be more than 1 person in each unit. So I think a reasonable number would say 2. So if you take 240 times 2, that's almost 500. So I believe an anticipated population increase would be about 5,500 once those are complete. And part of my research, I did meet with the management of the loft apartments, and they do have a wait list. So they are anticipated to be full capacity, all 3 units, by the end of July. And we are 4.4 square miles. All right, so our calls for service in compared to those other municipalities. Now remember, these are municipalities, and I chose these because to put into perspective what our call volume is compared to So Village of Butler and Village of Elm Grove, those municipalities are in Waukesha County. Big metropolitan area, 400,000 people are in Waukesha County. They also border Milwaukee County. Now, if you're looking at the calls that the Village of East Troy handles compared to the calls that the Village of Elm Grove and the Village of Butler handle, in 2021, the Village of East Troy handled 13,072 calls. So what I did was I broke that down into obligated calls and non-obligated calls. Obligated calls are calls for service that we must respond to. So those are either 911 calls, people calling a non-emergent, or walk-in calls. The other non-obligated calls would be traffic stop, business checks, extra patrols, other things that officers are out doing proactive that aren't necessarily obligations of a police officer, but in our job title. So again, that's running traffic and those sorts of calls for service. If you look at Village of Elm Grove, in 2021, they handled, and mind you, remember where they are, they handled 6,481 calls for service. Less than half of the calls the Village of East Troy handles. Now, I was able to look at Village of Elm Grove's calls for service, obligated and non-obligated. They handled 3,955 obligated calls. We handle almost double the amount of obligated calls that Elm Grove handles. And mind you, look where they are. They're in a metropolitan area, they're surrounded, they have 3 times the amount of people that we have here in Walworth County. Village of Butler, I was not able to break theirs down to obligated and obligated call, or non-obligated calls, but for the entire year, Village of Butler, they handled 4,992 calls for service. So you ask yourself, why did calls go up in the Village of East Troy? Number one, the growth. Our officers, we love to see the village grow. But at the end of the day, we're growing. We got businesses, we have all the homes that are being built. Like I said, this has been 7 months, so I have done, and I'm sorry if I go off on a tangent. I have a lot of information that I learned of why people are moving to East Troy. So, for example, Lake Bluff. In 9 months, Polinsky built, there's 16 homes there. There's only 5 left. In 8 months, regardless of with how the economy is doing, with high interest rates and homes being ridiculously expensive, they had no problem selling those 11 homes within 8 months. And I had the opportunity to speak to some of the homeowners there, and they said that the homes that they were looking for in McWanago, that same Belinsky house that's by the high school in McWanago, is $150,000 more. They said, we'll pay the $150,000 less and we'll live in East Troy and drive the 4 miles to Waukesha County. So that's just one of the encounters that I had. I'm going to try to stay on topic here. The business growth, again, the village is booming. The apartments that are being built, it's awesome. We just want to be able to keep up the police service that we know we're capable of. And when our call volume goes up, that means the lengths of investigations, the type of calls that we are investigating, they're lengthier in time. So if I have an officer that's out on a call for service that spends 5 hours doing an investigation, that's 5 hours that we don't have another officer going out, being proactive, running traffic stops, being able to patrol the schools. And it has nothing to do with the way Chief and I run the department. It's just we have more calls for service than we do people. I did put the bar scene because I don't want people to think, okay, well, what happens on third shift in the Village of East Troy? One thing I want you guys to understand is that there is nothing near the Village of East Troy for a bar scene. The town of East Troy, Lindy's is closed. They don't have a bar. The Village of McWanago, they do not have a bar. The town of McWanago has Sandy's. There's dive bars. So Sandy's is a dive bar with 11 stools. They have Trolley's. That's a dive bar. They usually, for the most part, they're closed by midnight. The town of Elkhorn, Lafayette, there is no bar. Our bars on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, everybody goes to our bar scene. Our call volume on third shift due to bars, and it has nothing to do with our owners. Our owners are awesome. Sammy's and Kitty from Al Smith, she calls us. She says, hey, we have problems. We go there. But it's just the atmosphere that the village is becoming, where people come out and it's a place that people like to visit. People come up from Lake Geneva, they go to the East Troy Brewery, and due to that amount of people, when you have 1,000 people influx in the Village of East Troy on any given Friday, Saturday, well, problems unfortunately follow. Society, the types of calls and the nature of our calls have increased. Policing is not the same as it was in 1990. I grew up in a law enforcement household, And I tell my dad the stuff that we encounter and the way people treat police now compared to back when my dad was a police officer in the 90s, and he's dumbfounded because society does not respect police the way they used to, and therefore it makes our job a lot harder. We spend a lot more time on our calls because simply removing a guy from a bar back in the day, hey, you're intoxicated, go home, they would listen. Now, you escort them out, then they spit in your face, they threaten you. Now a 15-minute proactive police procedure is now a 3-hour, if you're 3 hours at the hospital and you're going locking the guy up on some charges for disorderly conduct and threatening a police officer. So society also weighs on to the reason why our calls and why we spend more time on calls. And lastly, the nature of calls. So for a small department, we see a lot of increase in our sensitive crimes. Excuse me. Sensitive crimes and also like fraud investigations. I'm trying to think of some calls off the top of my head that take a lot of time. So our number one I can think of is our sensitive crimes. What sensitive crimes does is if we get a sensitive crimes investigation, that officer, you can guarantee, is going to be off the road for anywhere from 16 to 24 hours because we have subpoenas to fill out, we have warrants, we have follow-ups. A lot of the interviews we do sensitive crime interviews, CAC interviews with a forensic interviewer. That's Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, so we have to coordinate around their schedule. So there's a lot of moving parts that have created a call for service and an increase to those investigations in the village. So the IACP is the International Association of Chiefs of Police. There's two methods that they use to have a national standard as to what they believe an agency should be staffed at. The first method I didn't put up here because it involves a lot of math, and the number that is projected, I believe it said that we should be staffed at 17 officers. I felt that was extremely unreasonable. So this is the second method that the IACP uses to set the national standard. What they do is they say 2.5 officers per 1,000 population. So if we do the math that the IACP puts out there for the national standards, 2.5 officers by 5,500 people in the village of East Troy, that means that the levels we should be at is 13 officers. And I understand that is much more than what I'm asking for today, but I just want to let you guys know by national standards where we are on the map there. All right, so this is an organizational chart as to the staffing between Elm Grove, Butler, and the village of East Troy. Now remember, when I was showing you guys the comparable numbers for calls for service, just our obligated calls for service, where we were at compared to these two municipalities. So we are handling double the amount of calls for service, obligated calls for service, and this is the staffing that we have. So if you look at the village of East Troy, we have chief, the deputy chief, myself. We have 5 patrolmen and we have 1 SRO, which we are blessed to have during the summertime, but we do lose that officer during the school year. Elm Grove, they have, again, I want you to remember, we handle double the amount of obligated calls in Elm Grove. They have a chief, a deputy chief, a lieutenant. They have 3 sergeants, 2 detectives, and 9 patrolmen. Village of Butler has a chief, a captain, and 8 patrolmen. So we are doing double the amount of work with half the staff that Elm Grove has.
Excuse me, just a minute. For Elm Grove, the sergeants, are those like shift supervisors or
Those will be,
something?
yep, on each shift. Yep. That's all I have. All right, so I went into overtime. So what I wanted to show you guys is what can adding one officer do to our overtime budget. So what I wanted to do is show you guys the budget overtime that we've had since 2019. So in 2019, the village spent $57,094 in overtime. So what can adding the one officer do? The handout you guys have, what I did was in 2019, I went back and I redid the schedule and added that one extra body. And I was able, from January to October, I was able to alleviate every single open shift that we had. So adding that one extra body alleviates a lot of our overtime. What it also does is, more room to move personnel, free up overtime by moving shifts. There's 2 huge overtime areas that the village, that unfortunately we just can't anticipate for is going to be investigations and court. But what adding that extra body will do is it allows us to move and flex officers more. So we have our sexual assault investigator. A lot of the crimes and interviews are done between 8 and 4 when she goes and does the CAC interviews. What that would allow me to do is, instead of that officer going and doing an interview from 8 to 1 o'clock and then starting the shift at 2, where we just accumulated 7 hours of overtime, what I can do is I can move that officer's shift to an 8 to 4, bump down an officer. That way, it just allows me to flex officers more, moving them around where they just work a normal 8-hour shift and they're not accumulating that overtime. This is also big on court. So I'm coming from experience here. I've worked on third shift for 10 years. A big place where overtime is created, which we can alleviate by adding that body, is with courts. So if I work third shift, I work from 10 p to 6 a.m., and now I have court at 8 a.m. So I work 8 hours, I get a 2-hour break, and now I'm in court court can go to 5 o'clock at night. So now I do my court, that's 9-10 hours of overtime. I go home for 4 hours. Now I gotta be back for my shift at 10 o'clock and do a whole nother 8 hours. And I gotta do the same thing, so jury trials are 2 days. So I'm doing that 2 days in a row. So just between one jury trial on a third shift officer, that's 16 hours. And I shouldn't just say that's just not third shift. If an officer who's working second shift, if we don't have coverage, that officer is going from court to 8 to 4 and then coming to shift and working their shift until 10 o'clock. So adding that other body, what that will do is I will be able to flex and move them around, where if they say, hey, I have court at 6 a.m., I can at least give them their 8 hours, give them 8 hours off, and then they'll have their court. And what I can do is I can actually move their shift to their court time. So if they have court from 8 to 4, I can have a third shifter move to third shift, and that way that officer works 8 to 4 and they're done for that day. That way the village doesn't have any overtime. So it allows that flexibility. Another reason why overtime I put in there, this is all stuff that came from, I did a lot of interviews. So when I was in class, I had 26 other department leads, and these are all questions that I asked and got feedback from them. So in a young department, why overtime is created. And we have FMLA, we're a young department. We have officers off that are building their families now. We have 2 officers that anticipate being off in the next 2 months. I myself, I'm going to be expecting another little one here in November. So we're a young department. So the FMLA is going to create a lot of overtime. And again, I understand that that's short term. That's not going to happen all the time. But in years to come, our senior officers, when they leave, and it's just going to be a cycle where we have another young department officers come in, and the same thing happens. Time off, allowing officers to have time off. Chief, that's a huge one. I know he's not here. There's only one reason why those numbers right there aren't 6 figures. It's because of this guy right here. Chief picks up anywhere from 400 to 500 hours of overtime each year. I don't know. God bless him. And he does it for his officers, and I know every officer in that back room and really appreciates what Chief does. I can go back to Mother's Day. We had an officer call in third shift. Chief worked third shift on a Sunday, stayed to day shift, so he worked 16 hours, then went home and came back for a board meeting. And that's just what he does. But what I want as an administrator to do is be forward thinking. What's going to happen when he's gone? You're going to have an administrator come in, and their first year, their overtime budget's going to be $100,000, and you're going to say, well, why is that? Well, because we don't have somebody an administrator that's willing to take that time up. So I know the board sees it, because he also comes in and he has to ask for a vacation to carry over the next year because he doesn't have time to take it for himself. And like I said, I'm very blessed for it too, because that means I don't have to come in away from my family, and what he does is amazing. But I just want to be forward thinking, because one day that we're not going to have a Chief Swindrowski, and I just don't want to be sitting here saying, wow, why is that budget so high? So that's a reason why that number is relatively, I wouldn't say relatively low. I think 60 grand in overtime is a lot, but not higher than what it is. So All right. This was a survey I sent to the officers as to officer wellness. If we add another officer, what does that mean to them? And mental health, giving officers off right now, and everybody in their personal life understands how hard it is to find people. And I want to be able to take care of the officers that we have, the officers that are willing to work overtime, the officers that are willing to come in and work the parade and then stay for 2 hours. I mean, we had officers that worked, that came in, had 3 hours to sleep, came in, worked the parade, and actually slept here and then stayed for the fireworks. So what the officers do means the world to me. So I want to be able to take care of the officers that we are willing to have, just because it is so hard to find good help. So giving officers off when they need it for their mental health, less sick time. So if officers are able to get off when they want, and we don't have to deny them, what it would do is create, hopefully, and this is obviously the hope, would be that less sick time. If an officer is able to put in for time and we can grant that, then that's time that chief and I can say, okay, we need to, an officer took off a week and a half from now, we can move the schedule around, we can get that shift filled, versus if an officer gets that day denied and they're like, wow, I really need a mental health day, they call in sick, now we're either filling in overtime or scrambling last minute to find that extra body to cover that sick day. And then overall morale, you know, when you get a lot of burnt out cops, the morale goes down, and I don't want to see that. I know what it's like to be back there. I was back there a year and a half ago, and when I mean back there, I mean in the patrol room, and I know what it's like to be worked like a dog. And again, has nothing to do with administration. It's just when we have that many calls for service, you get burnt out. So having that overall morale, getting that one extra body that would be able to throw into the mix where we can get more people off, I would believe overall help. And again, this is all from the officers. This isn't something that I just made up. These are all questions that I had asked our staff and responses that I had received. So this just ties into chief. So what I did was I had a sergeant from Wauwatosa, and we did was we looked at the number of calls chief, the amount of time chief spends on a call in a 40-hour work week, and came up with, and I believe this was on the high side, approximately 40 hours of chief's daily duties is only administrative work. The rest, 40% of chief's duties are designated to administrative work. Chief comes in and he has to cover the road. We can't tell you when crime's going to happen. So when chief comes in, chief catches a fraud complaint. Chief is working that for 5, 6, 7 hours. He's got to apply for warrants. He's got to get subpoenas. He's got to do follow-up. He's got to meet with banks. So every administrative thing that chief has to do that week is pushed off. And we see it as staff because he's there 5, 6 hours after his scheduled shift because he wasn't able to get done what he needed to due to him being the only officer on the road. So it's adding that extra body. What we would do is we'd be able to put 2 officers on day shift so that way chief can come in, chief can get done what he needs to and not have to worry about being interrupted and get done what he needs to in the course of a day. All right, so I've been rambling on about what I would like, and I came up with a solution. I want to thank Eileen because I had a lot of solutions and there was a lot of closed doors, but she taught me a lot. I understand the TIDs and how those work and how it's nice that they bring in the businesses, but when I'm told that we don't see that money for 20 years, that closed a lot of doors on what I anticipated. So, but we worked through it, and so what the solution I came up with was she put me on the path for the shared revenue. And I watched this as it went through legislature. When it was first signed by Governor Evers, then it went to the Senate. That was 2 weeks, and then it came back to Evers, and he finally signed it. So it was 3 weeks of me holding my breath, because that was really the only way that I was able to come into here today and show you guys how we could come up with that money to fund that last officer. So the village will be receiving $113,618 from the shared revenue. And I understand that has to be shared. That's for law enforcement, that's for DPW, transportation, and our EMS and fire. And I didn't want to be like, hey, we're most important, we need the money. So I sat down and I said, where can we pull a little bit more money from so that way we can share with the other departments within the village. So my first proposal was the $20,000 for our part-time program. Part-time used to be easy to find because departments were fully staffed. Officers needed a little bit of extra income, they'd go work at another agency. Unfortunately, that's changed. So now officers, they have these crazy amount of overtime. So to have a part-time officer, it's a diamond in the rough. It's very hard to find. And officers that do this job and retire don't want anything to do with it. So we haven't been able to fully staff our part-time program. We've had one officer, Stricker, has been with us since 2019. He's been the only one, that has stayed with us. So my proposal was, well, I'll start with the first one, would be if we'll take the $20,000 and if we would subtract, no, I'll start this way, I'm sorry. I'm from East Troy, so my East Troy math isn't mathin'. So I take $113,618 plus $20,000 from our part-time program, and I spoke with Chief, and I said, I was able to show him these numbers, and I said, I would feel confident. Again, I can't clear the whole overtime budget because we do have our courts and our investigations that regardless are gonna create overtime. But he did feel comfortable saying, Josh, we can take $5,000 out of our overtime budget. So what that means is that gives us a total sum of $138,000 or $138,618. To hire an officer at the 3-year mark costs the village approximately $108,000. And that's at the 3-year mark. If the village wanted to start an officer at the beginning, that's anywhere $102,000 to $104,000, which would. Per year? Correct. Yes. Yep. So what that would leave, minus the extra money that we have in there, is $30,618 left in the shared revenue for any other department to use that money. And then the second proposal would be to keep the part-time program, and through attrition, whenever Officer Stricker decides to call it his time, we keep him on. So Officer Stricker, I went back to 2019. His payroll, it doesn't exceed $5,000 a year. So if we were to say we can keep the part-timer, we'll keep him at $5,000. We just make sure he doesn't go over that. That would be another proposal. And then what we would do is, as soon as Officer Stricker resigned, we would just take that $5,000, no longer have the part-time program, and put that toward into the shared revenue fund, or whatever fund that would go to. So overall, it would leave the village approximately 31, if we hired an officer at the 3-year mark. And I said 3-year because it puts the officer in the middle of the pay rate. So that way, we might be able to get maybe some lateral transfers, some officers that do have experience. Again, if the village would like to save $5,000 and we say we got to start somebody at 103, then that's a bridge we cross when we get there. But those are the two proposals that I had. Any questions?
First off, I'd like to thank you very much, Josh. Obviously, you put an awful lot of time in this. This is great information, and it just kind of underscores what I've thought for a long time, that we're understaffed. And I think you laid it out very well, and it's a very nice culmination of information.
Thank you.
I'm glad we sent you to that training. And I think every year we do the budget and we look at the overtime. Clearly, in my time on the board, I've seen the number of overtime hours that the chiefs put in, and I think for all of you, we've got to focus on how do we get you that mental health time, and just you can't be a good police officer, you can't be a good worker at anything with 3 hours of sleep. So especially with a physically demanding job. I really love that this is so data-driven, so thank you for looking at that. I think, too, while you were talking, because it's data-driven, I got to looking at equalized values. And so Elm Grove, I think they have the benefit of they're pretty wealthy. They're $1.4 billion in equalized value, and we're about, where are we? We're about 500,000, let's just say, around that. But you look at Village Butler, they're less than us. And obviously, they're smaller, as you said, but they're going down in their equalized value or staying steady. We've got a slight increase. So some of this, I think, is what the state legislature is trying to do with this. And just like you said, so if you look at your numbers you had, I think, with their leadership, they had 10, and we have 8. So this gets us more in line, I think, with them, and that's fantastic. So, and then we got to figure out how to do the next one, especially since one of our people is an SRO, which they don't have. So,
Sure.
But yeah, fantastic work. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And good timing.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions for?
Yeah, are we going to bring this back for more discussion?
I think the next step would be direction to staff, whether we include that in our draft of our operational budget.
Right, because I had a whole bunch of questions, but we've already been on this for over half an hour, and I didn't want to stress things out any more than, necessary, so I thought maybe it'd be a good idea to bring it back for more discussion.
We could do that if you guys would like to at the next meeting. August 7th is the meeting where we always come to the board every year and say, are there any changes in service levels you want us to consider in our operational budget? So I had said to Josh that probably would be the time we would get that direction from the board, whether or not we should be incorporating that.
I mean, I think the board, somebody disagree with me if you disagree, but I think the board's going to want to see it, with and without. Just we have it. But I think when we look at that call volume, this is not sustainable, what we have. And those are the restrictions that the legislature's put, is to focus on emergency services there. So whether, you may have to fight, Chief DeGaro over the money, because he, if it's not your emergency services, it's his. But I think we've got to look at that. I think also, too, and this is something I have, Mary will be there tomorrow, our Tri-Troy leadership meeting. We do need to have another Tri-Troy meeting. Emergency services are going to be a discussion item, and I think we have to revisit also, the funding for police officers. How do we improve our coverage? So there are opportunities there. We just have to find the political will.
I guess the only question I would have then for the first meeting in August would be a comparable then to, because I know that it was helpful to see how much overtime is being spent from officers, but what do we budget for an officer for just a straight 40-hour week? Excuse me, straight 40-hour week for the year with benefits. In other words, what's a basic figure for an officer for a year's pay, as opposed to then we could look at what overtime is costing and see what the comparables are. What does it cost for a police officer for a whole year? And as opposed to what we're paying for overtime?
My only question, I think, is, so this would be the funding for the initial year of the officer. Are we going to budget that every year? Are we going to take that out of shared services? Where is the money going to come every year?
So that additional shared revenue continues, and it will be adjusted each year. So that's where it would, we would have the funding in place for that, because that shared revenue will continue going forward.
That I understand, but we're going to use the shared revenue every year to pay for that officer? Or are we going to use it for other services?
No, you would, so it gets lumped in. Can somebody turn off that mic, please? Basically, that's just going to be a revenue line in our budget, and it offsets our expenditures. So, it's just going to be an increase to our revenue that's pretty equivalent to the increase in expenditures minus, the figures that Josh presented. So, yeah. And I explained it in my later memo, so they tied it to emergency services. But the real test is basically we have to prove that we're not decreasing our level of emergency services. So there's a maintenance of, I can't remember what the term was, but so when we're exhibiting that, we're showing that we're not decreasing staffing. There's two tests for fire and EMS, and one test must be met of the selections for police. But basically, you're proving that you're not decreasing spending for the police department on your staff and on your operating expenses. And for fire, there's a couple additional tests to that, which include licensing and training programs and things of that nature.
I guess that was kind of my point, is what you were getting to, Eileen, as far as what the basic cost of an officer is as opposed to what we're spending in entirety for overtime. And if you took part of that overtime budget then and used that to pay for another officer, you would be eliminating some of that overtime.
I think that's part of the numbers that he gave us, so the 5,000
Yeah.
would be the overtime and for that consideration.
But I didn't see where the full cost of an officer was for the whole year.
It's
The
103.
3-year was the 108,000 he presented. For a 3-year. Somebody at a 3-year rate. So if we brought in a police officer with experience that justified starting him at a 3-year rate, we're estimating 108,000. Now, that can vary depending on the health insurance plan they need and things like that.
That's for 1 year for one officer?
Correct.
And
with full
how much
benefits.
was their overtime?
The total overtime budget was at 40,000, Josh? Total overtime budget was 40,000, so it would decrease to 35,000.
So we're in consensus we'd like to see in the budget. Just go ahead and preempt next meeting's question. Okay. Any other comments, questions before we move on?
Thanks again. And I
Yes.
appreciate your passion for the rest of the officers.
All right. Item 2, impoundment update. Jason?
Okay, so RLP has made some pretty good progress on the punch list for the former impoundment dam removal project. Everybody sees the containers gone, right? That was a happy day to see that go away. But excuse me, they've done as you can see by the attached exhibit, they've done a lot of work. We did an inspection with them 2 weeks ago now, and found a few things that they didn't quite get the way we wanted them. So they've got a few more things to work on, but they've made some pretty good progress there.
What's their timeline on those?
I was told within the next 2 weeks. Weather dependent, of course, but it hasn't been raining, so.
Jason, just for knowledge of this, now, once they get these six items that are left on a punch list, and they say that they're done, is there going to be a final inspection by Lynch and you and everybody else involved?
That's correct. Someone from Lynch and myself will do a final walkthrough to make sure that things are as they say they are.
And they'll do that with the contractor?
Yes, and that's what we did to generate the exhibit in front of you as well.
It looks awesome, and it continues to look awesome as it fills in, so.
Yeah, obviously, we need a little bit of rain to help get some of that grass seed germinating and going, but it is turning green. It is turning greener in the areas that they just fixed up. We've been doing some watering around the lift station to help promote the growing of the grass, but it is looking nicer.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Item 3, consideration of new lease document for airport land leases. So you see there's a memo there from Lori and myself and Lori, and this has been going on, I think, since COVID, and with Kim here from the airport. The last lease we had was pretty old, so this is to simplify it, take care of some administrative burdens from the lessees and from us as the lessor. Any questions on this?
So we'll have 3 types of leases currently, if this is approved, or 4? I'm sorry, kind of missing here.
There will be 3. There's the really old lease, the 2016 lease, and then this one would be the 2023 lease.
What we'll probably come back to the board with here in the coming months is there's a bunch of ordinances pertaining to this that also need to be cleaned up. And so we're working with Tim Pruitt on that. And really, this lease gives a lot more flexibility to the hangar owners. So the hope is that using this as an enticement to get off of those older leases, and that we've standardized to this. And then, now there's a whole bunch of other documents, the covenants, and what else am I forgetting, Kim? Yeah, so there's a number of other agreements that when you sign a hangar lease or land lease, that come with it. So those got to be cleaned up as well. The whole thing is there was a lot of, well, this is in ordinance, but then this is in the lease, but then they conflict, and then just try to make it simple.
I think a lot of that was probably created because of their, the lack of coordination I think the Bureau of Aeronautics had with the FAA in giving us advice in the past. So I'm glad to see that that's happening. It looks like the majority of the, I'm the only mic that's hot, right? What's going on here? It looks like the majority of them are the older leases right now, huh? So it'll take a while for this to roll over then.
And some of this, what this will do as well is, one, it is more aligned to the BOA and their standard template. Two, this eliminates this back and forth with, it comes to us in a consent agenda to approve things. So it's weird, like, I buy your hangar, I buy Kim's hangar. It's like, well, I can inherit his, I can go, well, assign your lease. But if I rent an apartment and Kim was the previous tenant, I don't get to assume his lease. I sign a new lease, I'm a new tenant. So, and same thing for survivorship when we have a death or other things. So this makes this more straightforward than what it's been, which is, it's like, no, this is the new lease. So if somebody sells their hangar, this is the new lease. Okay? So I guess the ask is that we get a motion to approve that this is the lease going forward.
Sure, I'll move to approve the proposed airport hangar lease.
Any other discussion or questions?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions on this. So number 20, where it says default, the leasee shall be deemed in default upon, and it sounds like you have to go through all of these to be in default versus like one or more. It needs to be a little more clear on there.
In default of any of them as opposed to all of them.
Yeah. And then the other one I had was restoration, number 28, restoration of property, termination of lease. So removing all buildings. Within 90 days. So they'd have to remove a building? Yeah.
Yeah, it's their building.
Okay.
But if they fail to do that, then it becomes ours,
Okay.
and we have no interest in being a hangar owner other than the ones we have.
All right. I saw the remove the building and it just seemed extreme.
It's a little weird, but yes.
Yeah.
It's a little weird because it's their building, but it's our land. It's,
Yeah.
it's,
I didn't see in there, is there a question, I just had a thought about that, though. If they have to remove the building, are they responsible for any and all damage to the property before they leave? Like if they have a telehandler out there and they're tearing up the ground and everything to get this thing taken apart?
I don't know.
Restore the leased premises to its original vacant condition.
And then lastly, the 29 abandonment. So leasee or other aeronautical use for continuous period of 12 months. I don't know how we would calculate the 12 months. Like, when does the clock start? How do you know? And maybe
That's
it's-
from a complaint standpoint. And some of this is, the it's to have a provision, so should we end up in that situation, the likelihood of some of these occurring. I think on your first question there, what was that, section 20? Yeah, the default, I think if we just have, Chris, would you say just add an or after each one of those? Or some phrase like that, so.
I just don't want to get stuck into a
No,
lease.
yeah. We have a habit of that, getting stuck.
Those that have old leases, would they have the option of trading up to this new document if they so chose? And is that something we're going to encourage and promote?
Yes and yes. Highly. So I would look to your colleagues on the advisory committee and that are here to let people know and buy fuel.
I think we're planning on a rollout, once we get this approved and when we get that initial ordinance change, that we can notify people that this is available and that they have the opportunity to convert the leases that they have and how that would work. Then if they want to do that, they can contact us so that we can get their specific information into a lease to send out to them for signatures. Because it'll change on how some things are calculated and stuff, so. If it'd be nice, because one of the things with this new lease is, if you notice the term, everybody's expires at the same time instead of whatever day you happen to sign your lease, which can get kind of confusing. And it does give you the opportunity to get everything a little bit more consistent with your friends and neighbors. So,
Something maybe more for the Airport Advisory Committee, but maybe an open house or an open forum, or we could invite people to come in and answer questions that they might have.
that'd be a really good time that they could do that, once we get that rollout going. Okay.
And meet Doug, if they haven't met Doug yet. All right, any other questions or discussion? There's a motion, a second on the floor. All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I never thought I'd get to that. All right, staying with the airport items, A, B, and C, consideration of FBO lease as amended and airport manager contract closeout, consideration of a temporary FBO lease, and fuel purchasing discussion and possible direction / authorization, no packet materials. Jason.
All right, so let's look at the airport closeout agreement first. This agreement is essentially what you all had previously approved. During the negotiation process, we did negotiate wholesale price on all three fuels. The only difference in this agreement, there was another vendor that came forward that was unpaid. So this new agreement that Attorney Geary drafted compensates for that. And so essentially, we're going to pay the vendor and then deduct that from the payout to Aviator Services. So pending approval tonight, the only outstanding item then will be for Aviator Services to vacate the FBO hangar, which they have until the end of July to do that. But once they've done that, then we can issue payment. And that closes that out.
And he's signed.
Yes, Aviator Services has signed on the line.
And was the 33,000, was that the unpaid fuel?
Yes.
Okay.
And are we going to engage with someone on the SWIFT?
That's already done.
So then we are going to end up owing 11,462.30. It's what it says on the last page then, and we're clean and done?
To Aviator Services, correct.
Any, so we need a motion to approve this so we can close this out?
I'll make a motion that we approve the contract closeout agreement with Aviation Services.
I'll second that.
Just make sure, Aviator Services, correct? Okay, all right. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we'll go on to the temporary FBO lease.
So as you remember, through the process, we found out Aviator Services had subleased out the FBO hangar. So the lease in front of you, drafted by Attorney Geary, is a short-term lease to allow that aircraft or that aircraft owner to stay until November 1st. He indicated to me today he thought he would probably stay for a couple of months until he can find a new home for his airplanes. But he has already provided us the required insurance. So pending your approval on this, he can stay till November 1 for $500 a month.
Up to November 1, correct?
Correct.
Because our plan is to put snow equipment in there.
Correct.
In that case, I'll move to approve the temporary FBO hangar lease for Rick Putlitz, lessee.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Fuel purchasing discussion.
So I'm happy to report, as of 4 o'clock today, we're the cheapest 100 low lead in the area by 10 cents.
Cool. Do we need to get like a banner and fly behind a plane and fly like over Burlington? I'm just saying, you know.
So, obviously, I came to you guys at the last meeting for authorization to purchase fuel. Again, we did not budget to purchase fuel. This is, a lot's happened since the beginning of the year. What I would like is some direction or authorization for purchasing of fuel so that we can do it when we need to. EAA is coming up. We're kind of watching where that's at. It's a balance, right? You don't want to order the fuel too soon and have it sit around, but yet you want to have the fuel on hand to sell. So what I would like is some authorization from the board to be able to purchase fuel as we need it, rather than coming back to you every time.
Have you talked to the fuel company at all as far as, I thought they had some particulars as far as their deliveries?
So we've got to give them a few days' notice, and they can get us fuel delivered depending on quantities.
Well, that was my question. I thought there was a minimum quantity. I thought I heard him say that.
And there is. But what I'm looking for is you guys to give me the authorization to place those orders rather than working around meeting schedules, coming back to you every time.
The problem Jason has is because it's not budgeted, he has no budget authority to go do this. And so he's looking for that, but it is hard to budget it, given the variable nature of that.
I totally understand. I guess my other concern, though, was that I know that we're fortunate to have this fuel company working with us to help us, get things moving. And the only thing I wouldn't, and Jason, I'm sure you're aware of it, you don't want to leave fuel sitting in the ground for 9 months, 10 months. So I agree that we should give you the opportunity to order fuel as you need it. But I just didn't want to see us order, have the company say, well, you're going to have to get, X amount of fuel. And we're going to say, well, that seems like an awful lot.
We still have to authorize the quantity of fuel that's ordered. The order comes from village staff, not from Titan Fuels.
Well, I think it makes sense to be able to place those orders, without having to come to the board for approval. I understand the budget conundrum, but how do we do that? With authorizing a purchase up to a certain amount, or?
Well, I think that's the problem, is we do that. I think what I was thinking about over the weekend is, because there's an offsetting revenue for this, I think we need to I know you're trying to get the software up and going here, but I think by September, maybe there's a monthly report in our report section just for the rest of the year and I'm not trying to create, if it's really complicated, but something that gives us, here's how much we bought, here's how much we sold, here's the net amount, cost to the village. And that way we can go, okay, retroactively, we can give you, yeah, we agreed with that, yep. And then if we see it going in the wrong direction, which I don't think we'll see, then we can have a conversation with you on a month-to-month basis, as opposed to, at the end of the year and go, we bought how much? Which, again, I don't think that would be the case.
Do we know how much we have right now and how much you're anticipating?
I do not know those numbers right now. Doug would, but he's on vacation this week. I don't know that. The only thing, we had a conversation before he left, and I really felt it's important that we are ready at the drop of a hat to be able to place an order for some fuel. So unfortunately, no, I don't have those numbers. I will tell you, to Matt's comments, we will have some software in place to do just what you're talking about, but that is not in place yet. And Eileen, you had a figure the other day that you shared with me. What was that?
So we are working internally on the reports amongst numerous staff members, but just a quick glance at our checking account that the deposits go into. In the 3-week time period, we've had over $16,000 deposited in fuel sales, which I didn't think was bad for the first 3 weeks of sales. So I shared that with Jason, and I said, well, that's almost half of what we're paying the vendor. So I think that's a positive. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything, but, in 3 short weeks.
Absolutely. I think maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but if we as the village were to give them a bank of, say, $10,000 or whatever it is, and then let them work off it, because once the fuel's sold, there's going to be more than $10,000 in the bank, and they'll be able to work off of that.
I think he's going to need authorization for more than 10,000, though.
Well, I don't know how much fuel you're going to need. I don't know how much money you're going to need. But to get started, it's like you've got an initial fund, and then from there, that you should be able to keep snowballing that fuel amount in for purchases, because obviously we're going to be selling it for more than what we're paying for it.
Understood. So now you're getting into an accounting question with Eileen, and that's really up to her, how she wants to handle that.
Right, and we're still trying to establish the reports. Obviously, we're monitoring it, and the problem with like what I just shared with you, that's what hit our account. There's lag time. So the sales were more than 16,000. How much more? I don't know yet, because we're working on that transition of the software right now. So we will be able to get all this data. It's just we're working to find a way to be able to report it right now. I think that for the time being, there should be an authorization for Jason to be able to purchase up to a certain amount without coming back to the board. And then hopefully by the time we meet that amount, we can come back with some good reports to show this is what, you've spent so far, this is what the revenue's been, this is the flowage, what, we've purchased in gallons, what's been sold in gallons.
So we had to pay wholesale, we had to pay that bill, $33,000. Is 50 enough to get you?
Yes, that would certainly get us a delivery of 100 low lead and a delivery of Jet A.
And so how long until you have the software? And I don't know how often. I mean, I guess we had a delivery once a quarter.
We've ordered one delivery so far, right after Titan.
Yeah. There's only 100 low lead, though.
Correct. Yeah, we've not ordered any Jet A yet. We had a substantial amount of that. So we've only taken one delivery of 100 low lead. I think it was 4,500 gallons.
Do we have the proceeds coming into a separate account, or is it going into a general?
Going to be a fund?
No, we use a pooled checking account at the village, which actually pays the bills for all of our funds, but it's all accounted for separately on our general ledger. So all that revenue is posted into the airport fund, just like any other revenue that would come into that checking account for water, for sewer. They each have a general ledger account that is the checking account, and it gets posted to their revenue and their checking account, even though the money's all consolidated. So we are able to track.
Because what I was thinking is, spent up to what revenue is.
But again, you have a lag, and so the problem is you got to make the investment to get there. And so I think I'd like to propose 50,000, and then that'll give them time to work out the trend analysis, which is what we don't have. And then if you feel like you're in another situation, then we've got another meeting here in a few weeks, because AirVenture is next week.
And we may not order fuel prior to that, but I would just like to be able to have the tool I need to do it if we
Are
do.
you going to have enough fuel for that AirVenture?
That's what we're monitoring.
right, I'll make a motion to authorize DPW to purchase additional fuel up to $50,000.
Second.
Any other questions, discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item 5, consider purchase of bleachers for Mitchell Park. You have a memo here in your packet from Vicky. Any questions for Jason?
Are these going to be split up between two diamonds?
So, yes, she is purchasing 5, and I just wanted to point out, the ask here is for 5. Yeah, and the quote was for 8. Yes, so there'll be actually 3 diamonds, because there's two bleachers per diamond, so 2.5.
This is within budget? I know it's in capital, but we budgeted this amount.
Yeah, so she had a number of things in a Mitchell Park improvements, and she had 35,000 earmarked within that number for bleachers.
So I'll move to approve $35,950 for the purchase of 5 sets of bleachers.
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. 6, update regarding Tri-Troy Library statutory issues and possible direction to staff. And you see another fantastic memo from Eileen and a discussion from County Administrator Mark Liberta. I and Mary attended that meeting, and Tammy and the rest of the library board staff were there as well, or library board. It's a little convoluted, but there is a path forward, and he is, Mark Liberta has done this, I think a great job here. The question is, next steps. We're kind of stuck without legislation. I guess, does everybody understand what the memo and the direction from the county is?
We were given a solution, but it was going to have to be enacted by all 3 of the municipalities, correct?
That was for the budgeting, I believe, right?
So the solution really wouldn't work without state law changes because of levy limit implications. So it prohibited us from moving forward. There's a difference between those levy limits and the county tax exemption for the library that would have put the towns in a precarious position that they couldn't have funded.
Right, I thought at the last meeting that we had here was a while ago, like a year or 2 ago, when I thought somebody was going to contact Mr. Nass about helping us out with that in the legislature.
That's kind of what the memo alludes to, is how we could go about proposing legislation, then we could get somebody to sponsor that legislation. So that's really what this is, kind of formulating a plan to do. And now we have new state representatives, so we'd have to contact the new ones.
I mean, the idea too is to get state staff on board first, so, when legislators are proposing it, staff go, yeah, we agree. The county administrator also pointed out that he's run this by the Wisconsin Counties Association, and they love the idea. So we would have multiple counties in support of this as well. I'm sure the league and the Towns Association would be in support of this as well. I think the gap that we didn't understand is the portion of dollars that the county has to deal with is not subject to levy limit. So it's crossing, you're going from, in essence, unrestricted, quote unquote, to very restricted. And that's what creates this calculation change that really, when you look at these different state statutes, did not envision anybody ever doing this. And yet, like we talked about emergency services, the thrust is to consolidate government services. So I think there's an appetite now to address this. We've just got to get it lined up. And I think the county is on board with this. They're not opposed at all. They'd love to see this.
Tammy, did you want to add anything, as long as you're here?
I don't know that I can add anything to Matt's brilliance.
Tammy, why don't you come up, though? From my perspective at the meeting, that the county administrator really looked into this. He's passionate. Yeah, and provided, as Matt indicated, a pathway that he was willing to work with us.
I would add, Matt, he named all of the different organizations that would be helping, the county boards, the trustees, but also the Wisconsin Library Association. We did have the administrator for our library system, and he would also be helping. And one of the other things Matt Mark had said was he would appreciate a letter from the municipalities in support so that he can justify to his board his work on this.
I think too, and we pretty much already have this by approving the contract that we came up, or a tri-troy agreement, is that we would need to make a minor modification to that that says that, like, this would go into effect once these statutes or legislation, are corrected. Because the concern might be, as Mark Liberto pointed out, is that you do this and then you go back on your word that we're going to do this, and that you're going to end up in a levy limit overture, and you're going to end up with penalties and all these other things. And the state doesn't want to create those situations where they'd have to go and enforce that. And I think where that could easily come about is you've got communities that want to come together to build a library. And I know we want to build one, but we already have one. So we're talking about changing the operating nature of what we already have versus, let's just say, you had 3 communities wanted to come together and there's no surrounding library. It's like, well, okay, you would want to draft an agreement that then has some sort of capital funding and other things like that. So I think our agreement points out that path forward, that we're ready to operate and not go back on this, and that all 3 municipalities. So we do need to redo that. We need to do a letter, as you said, to the county, but probably also the Department of Revenue. And he has some proposed changes here, and I think then, and so correct me if I'm wrong, I think he wanted to lead the charge in a discussion with the Department of Revenue, and then we could lead the charge on talking to our legislators to get a sponsor.
Yeah, I think that was the purpose of the municipalities writing the letter asking, so that he could tell his board, they want me to work on this.
The brilliance is writing this. By the way, this has not been reviewed by Corporation Counsel. I asked him that, so, there is some, question as to what this will look like in the end. So I think then we need to, I don't think we need a motion here, but consensus to staff to update the tri-troy agreement. I'll discuss that with Joe and Jerry tomorrow to add that clause, and then a letter to the county that could be used for all 3. And I don't know if we want to engage, I'm sorry, who's the attorney that we used from the town?
Eric Larson.
Is that more appropriate for him to draft that? Yeah, I think just if you all would contact him and propose a draft letter that says we're in support of the county pursuing this, and then we need to figure out through another tri-troy discussion, how can we get state legislators here now that they're through the budget?
I can't see any reason why we wouldn't want to pursue this path, so as far as I'm concerned, yeah.
So we good on that consensus? Okay. Tammy, anything else? Okay, thank you. Thanks for keeping me. I'm not brilliant. I forgot things. Okay, item 7, consideration of proposal for audio-visual upgrades in conference rooms B and C utilizing American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funds. And you have the memo here from Eileen. I know I've come over here for meetings with staff, and I'm like, oh, if only I could just throw something up on the screen. We had a meeting with the developer last week over here, and we were looking at maps, trying to, it's like, I wish I could just, throw something up on the screen and pull it up, look at GIS, whatever it is, presentation. And then, 2, you think about training that staff have to do, especially more and more online. They can do it together, that sort of thing. And obviously, if they need to meet with any of us as a group, they could do that as well. Potentially, we could have other, parts of the village start to use it too. Let's see how it goes.
Are these ARPA funds that we already have?
And so I was just going to say, we got to designate these by the end of next year, and there's a pretty healthy balance left. So I think the successful upgrades here, when Jason and Joe and I were out at Spring Prairie just talking about their situation with meeting stuff, and what Gene was talking about transparency, this is just more and more electronic stuff to just make our jobs easier and better.
I have to admit I'm conflicted on this. I'm conflicted because I'm a technologist and I love technology. I love gadgets. I love all of this stuff. This is fabulous stuff. It can be used in so many ways. It can improve all our lives. But the reason I'm conflicted is because we've had other projects that have been lingering and we've been kicking the can down the road for years and years. The lobby is not done. Poor Jason's guys can't get it done. We got to contract it out, get it done. We've got an AC problem in this building we all know about. Why don't we just focus on those things instead of trying to add something like this? I don't mind, the idea of having maybe some TVs with cables you could plug in to use your own equipment to display and stuff like that. I don't know that we need to go to this level, and I guess I would like to see our priorities focus on the stuff that we've been trying to get done for an awful long time. The shared revenue thing is awesome. We can finally add a police officer. I think we need to tackle these other things that have been priorities for us that we need to put in the forefront and get done first.
You got a list?
Those two.
Then we still have what, 250,000 after this? 257,000 that haven't been designated?
I understand, but I just don't think there's been enough energy around those other two things. And I think
I
that's where the
agree.
priorities should be.
Okay.
So.
But I don't think 25,000 is going to make or break that. I agree, because I want to, that's money that gets projects off our plate, gets transformational, other things, but there's a lot of other things that we also need to look at, like that. That was the reason why using the ARPA funds for that polymorphic is we're only going to be able to hire an officer. How do we make our job, or the staff's jobs, more efficient so that we can continue to deliver more service, higher quality service with the staff level we've got without driving our staff crazy?
And I think that office, the front office redesign included a conference room where we could stick this stuff in and it would get used a lot more than it would in meeting room B.
Which one's meeting room B? Is this? Yeah, but that's also where we bring in people, we bring in developers and other people, and we're all pushing paper across the table, and it's like, oh, well, let me go look up this map, and, I'm like turning my laptop around and trying to show them, so. But in those plans, I don't remember a conference room.
So and I'm not clear on them right now at the moment, I don't have them in front of me, but there might have been a smaller meeting room, like a, 2 to 3 person, not a large conference room, I don't believe.
Oh, okay.
That's like what you have next to your office.
Correct.
It's like a breakout room. And if we're going to do one, why are we not doing both? Like, if we're going to do that one, why are we not doing this one? This one gets just as much use.
I just struggle with the amount of use it gets. I really do. So, I do. I struggle. I don't come to the meetings you come to, obviously.
Well, it's not just
You
that,
know.
though, too. Think about all the events that we have in these rooms. You know, Boy Scouts are here, other meeting groups. We can open this up to the public for when we're not using it. And people can come in and book it, and then they can have their presentations, and they can do whatever they need to do. And if Boy Scouts are doing a project with somebody overseas, they can use the camera, and they're all there, as opposed to all having to sit at home.
Okay. I don't think it's a terrible idea. Don't get me wrong, Matt. I'm not trying to argue against it. I'm trying to argue for other priorities
When to do
that need to get
Well,
done,
and-
and we just can't get them done.
And I will say, I've asked for that list. So if anybody has a list, I'd love to see it. So we've talked about the staffing on that for the remodel. And I thought we approved last time the money for the air conditioner. Are you talking about something else?
That was just repairs from cost.
Well, then let's lay that out. We still have money here. We got $250,000. Let's figure it out. That's fine.
Do we have a bid on the AC to get it repaired?
No, so this predates me. A project was engineered to take all the HVAC stuff and put it on the roof. And it got to a bid opening. Bids came back astronomically high, so it was kind of scrapped. And then the conversation started about the lobby. And then it was decided, let's get the lobby done, and then we'll do the HVAC.
We talked about the air conditioning back when Judy Weeder was still the administrator, because she called me in, and I worked with a couple of different HVAC companies to talk about this and what was being done because of the high humidity in the offices sometimes in the summer. And that's at that time, Jason, we were talking about this. The thought was again, to eliminate humidity and to get these air conditioning units working at higher efficiency. And that was a long time ago. And back then, I thought the quote was like $284,000. But I could be wrong.
So I'm going to preempt something that Eileen has for the agenda in our next meeting, which is the difference between tabling and postponing, because we use those incorrectly, and I've been educated now by the league. So I would suggest that we postpone this to give staff an opportunity to give you some competing priorities and what that looks like. But I think also, too, to what our discussion is on some of these other items and parks and, what are improvements to what we have that we need to make versus, let's go build a new park. So, Jason, how long for you to put together on the AC and that information? I know you're about to go out of town, though, aren't you?
I will not be at the August meeting, the first August meeting. So Tim Lynch has provided me with some names of some architects. I think we're probably gonna end up having to do an RFP to get, so as we talk about the lobby, we all remember the plan was to try to have DPW do that. And I had said within the last year and a half, excuse me, DPW isn't gonna get it done. Unfortunately, I think we have a lot of talent. We could do it and save some money doing it, but obviously it's not happening. So we got to go to Plan B, and I think we need state-approved plans to do it. So we're going to need to contract out with an architect to get that, and then the project will have to be bid out. And then after the lobby's done, that's when the HVAC can happen.
So is 1 month sufficient for us to postpone?
You know what, though? If you don't mind, the lobby does not have to be done in order for us to get the HVAC bid. Because as long as we have plans for what's going to be done in the lobby, the HVAC contractors can then bid their job accordingly.
I don't know that a contractor's gonna bid something that far. I mean, ultimately, before they can install equipment, the walls need to be configured as.
Not necessarily. They'll go off, they bid off of plans all the time, Jason. And
Okay, I think we're running afoul of,
I don't think so. I think what it is that if you want to get an estimate, you talk to the
no,
architect.
we're running afoul of going off the agenda. We're way off. Sorry, I'm going to bring it back. Not that you're not asking good questions, you are. I just don't think that this agenda item gives us the authority to go talk about that. So I think we need to postpone this for a month, not for the first August meeting, but the second August meeting, and that'll be my motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, any other discussion or questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, if you have questions or direction to staff on ARPA funds or prioritization, please send those out, email them, call them. If you email them, CC me. We need to track that. All right, item 8, consider approval of garage door replacement at the wastewater treatment plant. Any questions for Jason?
Does this just come out of the replacement fund?
Nope, so it's a line item in the budget. We had budgeted money to rebuild the polymer system. Staff was able, replace it. Staff was able to rehab it, so we're not going to utilize that $10,000, and we have a garage door that's failing, so we would like to use that, redirect that money, which is why it's before you, redirect that money for the garage door replacement.
Are we going to have to do any more doors that maybe we want to budget for next year for?
We'll have to evaluate. We've already completed the capital process, so we'll have to evaluate what is necessary.
I move to approve the proposal to replace the garage door with Scotty P Garage Doors.
Okay, any other questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. See you tomorrow night, Mary. Moving on to reports, June financial reports. So June financial, variance, airport, and capital. Any questions for Eileen? Okay, moving on to emergency services, 5:16 minutes. Questions for Jason? Okay. Booth Lake Memorial Park minutes from 5:17. Questions for Joe? Okay. Memo there on airport insurance update and the recommendation from staff, from Eileen. Any questions for Eileen on that?
I have a question. I'm just curious, Eileen. I know at one time the village was going to offer a car to have out there at the airport, so if somebody flew in, they could have some kind of transportation into the village. I don't know if that ever came about. I know that somebody said that Walter had a car he'd let somebody use, but in my question is, if the village is going to offer a supply, maybe an old squad car, whatever, to park out there, should we have that included in insurance? That's all my question is.
Well, absolutely. If the village supplied a car, we would need to make sure we had proper insurance. Right now, we don't have that in our insurance. I do question whether that demand has changed. Like, we recently had a call on that and said we don't have one, and the guy called an Uber. I don't know how many Uber drivers are out in the area, but things have changed since the original discussions on providing a car, so I don't know if it's even necessary anymore.
I think it is a discussion that's going to come back.
I think that's for you guys to talk about at the airport and figure out a process to make that smoother and transparent, and then we can go back to maybe ask insurance if they have, once you've got a process, do they have any recommendations or? Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. All right, airport minutes, June 12th. Any questions for Jim?
How's it going there, Jim? How's the meetings going?
I think as an overall, great. I think the steps that have been taken, I think Doug has certainly been well-received. Having Jason out there for a few meetings has been good. Personally, I have a lot to learn, and so I'm just thankful that the rest of the committee is willing to bear with me, give me support and guidance along the way.
Excellent. Item 6, Park and Rec, 612, questions for John? You're surprised? Is there something? Okay. All right, item 7, Police Department Quarterly Report, Q2 2023, questions for Josh? Okay. Item 8, Library Board minutes from June 13th. Questions for Mary? Okay. Item 9, Draft Plan Commission minutes from last Monday, July 10th. Any questions for 40 or me? I would appreciate any comments you might have on the there was a lengthy discussion about some things around carports or the temporary things. So if you have,
The aluminum conduit and plastic temporary shelters.
people put boats and cars and ATVs under. And then item 10, the administrator's summary on the shared revenue bill, which has been the star memo of this meeting. That's brilliance.
You should sell this to other municipalities.
You should.
Well, I did get a lot of the information from the league, so I can't completely take credit for it. If, without their summary, it would have been very difficult for me to read that entire bill. I do want to point out those TID changes. Did everybody understand what I reported on those TID changes? Okay.
Okay. That said, I will make a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 1985 1E for the purpose of conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. TID developments and potential TID developments.
Second.
Roll call vote, please. Good night.
President Johnson?
Yes.
Trustee Alexander?
Yes.
Trustee Holm?
Yes.
Trustee Nugent? Yes. Trustee Renucci?
Yes.
Trustee Smalley? Yes. And Trustee Wisniewski?
Yes.
Thank you.